Welcome back to our channel, your premier destination for the most captivating, in-depth, and shocking updates from the world of daytime drama. Today is a beautiful day to dive into the latest explosive developments that are set to change everything we know about our favorite families. The tension has reached an unprecedented boiling point, and the fallout will be felt for generations. Let us jump right into the heart-stopping drama currently unfolding in the glamorous yet treacherous hills of Los Angeles. The corporate warfare at Forrester Creations has always been a ruthless battleground of massive egos, deeply entrenched family loyalties, and bitter rivalries, but absolutely no one could have predicted the cataclysmic turn of events that has now stained the legacy of this fashion dynasty in blood. For weeks, the atmosphere within the executive offices has been suffocating, driven by an escalating power struggle that transcended mere business disagreements. Steffy Forrester Finnegan, wielding her co-CEO title like a weapon of mass destruction, had made it her personal mission to systematically dismantle Hope Logan Spencer's career. The relentless humiliation, the condescending remarks, and the ultimate, devastating decision to officially suspend the Hope for the Future line in favor of Eric Forster's couture collection had pushed the Logan women to the absolute brink. Brooke Logan Forrester, a woman whose entire existence has been defined by her fierce, sometimes blinding, and overwhelmingly protective devotion to her children, watched her daughter's dreams be crushed under the heel of Steffy's designer stilettos. The psychological toll on Brooke was immense, a toxic brew of maternal outrage and historical resentment simmering just beneath the surface. When Steffy delivered the final, humiliating blow to Hope, dismissing her years of hard work with a flippant wave of her hand, something fundamental and terrifying snapped deep within Brooke's psyche. The rational, strategic matriarch who had been meticulously planning a corporate takeover was instantly consumed by a blinding, uncontrollable tempest of pure, unadulterated rage. The fateful evening began under the heavy, oppressive, and unusually dark skies of Los Angeles, a pathetic fallacy that perfectly mirrored the impending doom. Steffy Forrester Finnegan, the reigning queen of Forrester Creations, had left the office feeling a profound sense of arrogant triumph. She had successfully protected her family's legacy, or so she believed, by putting the Logans firmly in their place. However, her triumphant drive home along a notoriously winding, secluded, and deserted stretch of the coastal highway was abruptly interrupted. A sudden, violent blowout of her luxury vehicle's front tire forced her to pull over onto the narrow shoulder of the desolate road. Steffy, frustrated but entirely unsuspecting of the horrific nightmare that was about to unfold, stepped out of her car into the chilling night air. The road was eerily quiet, save for the distant, rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves against the unforgiving cliffs below. She stood by the side of her vehicle, the harsh red glow of her taillights illuminating her silhouette as she pulled out her phone to call for roadside assistance. In that fleeting moment, the powerful, untouchable co-CEO was rendered entirely vulnerable, a solitary figure isolated in the enveloping darkness of the California coastline. Meanwhile, hurtling down that very same stretch of deserted road, Brooke Logan Forrester was a woman entirely possessed by her own inner demons. Inside the suffocating cabin of her vehicle, the air was thick with the echoes of Steffy's cruel laughter and Hope's tearful devastation. Brooke's hands gripped the leather steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity, her knuckles aching as her mind replayed every single insult, every condescending glare, and every historical injustice the Forrester women had ever inflicted upon her family. The rage was a living, breathing entity within her, clouding her vision, drowning out her reason, and transforming her maternal protective instincts into a lethal, malevolent force. As Brooke's car rounded a sharp, treacherous bend in the road, the sweeping beams of her headlights suddenly cut through the darkness, illuminating a scene that would forever alter the trajectory of their lives. There, standing defenseless by the side of her crippled vehicle, was the physical embodiment of all Brooke's torment, Steffy Forrester Finnegan. The visual of her husband's daughter, The woman who had just gleefully destroyed Hope's future, standing there in the cold night air, triggered a catastrophic short circuit in Brooke's moral compass. What happened next was not an accident born of negligence, nor was it a tragic twist of fate. It was a visceral, terrifying, and split-second manifestation of decades of accumulated hatred. In a moment of pure, unhinged madness, Brooke did not instinctively reach for the brake pedal. Instead, driven by a primal scream echoing in her mind, she pressed her foot down hard on the accelerator. The powerful engine of her car roared with a deafening, predatory growl, the vehicle surging forward like a guided missile locked onto its target. The impact was a horrific, stomach-churning symphony of shattered glass, screeching metal, and a sickening, resonant thud that seemed to echo into eternity. Steffy Forrester Finnegan never even had a fraction of a second to register the blinding headlights bearing down upon her. The sheer force of the accelerating vehicle struck her with devastating brutality. She was violently thrown into the air, her body launched over the hood of Brooke's car before crashing down onto the unforgiving, coarse asphalt of the deserted highway. Inside the cabin of her car, the deafening silence that immediately followed the violent collision acted as a brutal, icy splash of reality, instantly snapping Brooke out of her blinding fugue state. The adrenaline that had fueled her murderous rage evaporated in a single heartbeat, replaced by a cold, paralyzing, and absolute terror. Brooke slammed on her brakes, the car skidding to a halt several yards down the road. Her breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide with a manic, disbelieving horror as she stared into the rearview mirror. Through the cracked, spiderweb glass of her windshield and the dim red glow of the taillights, she could see the motionless, broken body of Steffy lying in a rapidly expanding pool of dark crimson blood. The horrific reality of what she had just done crashed over Brooke with the crushing weight of a collapsing building. She had not just sought revenge. She had committed a brutal, unforgivable act of violence against her husband's beloved daughter. She had crossed a line from which there could be absolutely no return, no justification, and no redemption. Panic, cold, absolute, and suffocating, seized Brooke's heart with an iron grip. The instinct for self-preservation, a desperate, cowardly need to escape the consequences of her monstrous action, overrode any lingering shred of human decency. Instead of throwing her car into reverse, instead of running to the aid of the woman she had just critically injured, Brooke's trembling foot found the gas pedal once more. With tears of hysterical terror streaming down her face and violent sobs tearing at her throat, Brooke Logan Forrester fled into the night, abandoning Steffy to the cold, merciless darkness of the coastal road. The deserted highway, however, did not remain a silent tomb for long. Fate, in its infinitely cruel and twisted design, orchestrated the arrival of the one man whose soul would be most thoroughly shattered by this macabre scene. Ridge Forrester, driving home after a late, exhausting evening of attempting to mediate the endless corporate wars of the office, noticed the familiar silhouette of his daughter's car stranded on the shoulder ahead. A knot of paternal concern instantly tightened in his chest as he pulled his own vehicle over, the flashing hazard lights casting eerie, rhythmic shadows across the asphalt. Ridge stepped out of his car, calling out his daughter's name into the chilling wind, expecting to find her frustrated over a flat tire. But the sight that greeted him as he rounded the back of her vehicle was a tableau of unimaginable, soul-destroying horror. There, lying unnaturally still on the cold, rough ground, bathed in the sinister red light of the hazard blinkers, was his daughter. His beautiful, strong, fiercely independent Steffy, broken, bleeding, and clinging to the very edge of existence. The visceral, guttural scream of absolute agony that tore from Ridge Forrester's throat was a sound of pure, unadulterated heartbreak, a primal wail that seemed to fracture the very night sky. He fell to his knees beside her, his tailored suit instantly soaking up the warm, sticky blood that pooled beneath her fragile form. His hands, usually so steady, trembled violently as he hovered over her, terrified to touch her, terrified of making her catastrophic injuries worse. He frantically screamed for help to the empty road, his tears mixing with the dust and blood on Steffy's pale, lifeless face as he desperately fumbled for his phone with blood-stained fingers to call emergency services. The wail of approaching sirens soon pierced the night air, a desperate, screeching crescendo of flashing red and blue lights that shattered the isolation of the coastal highway. Paramedics descended upon the scene with chaotic, practiced urgency, their voices a blur of medical jargon as they fought a frantic, high-stakes battle to stabilize the critically injured fashion executive. Ridge was physically pulled away, forced to stand on the periphery of his own worst nightmare, his hands coated in his daughter's blood, his mind entirely unable to process the sheer, brutal reality of the violence that had been inflicted upon her. Inside the sterile, unforgiving, and brightly lit walls of the emergency room, the situation escalated into a full-blown medical crisis. Steffy was rushed into emergency surgery, her life hanging by the most fragile, fraying of threads. The diagnosis was grim: massive internal bleeding, severe cranial trauma, and multiple complex fractures. The medical team worked with desperate precision, fighting against the fading clock to save the life of a woman who had been brutally struck down in her prime. The waiting room, meanwhile, became a suffocating chamber of grief, fear, and agonizing uncertainty. As the Forrester family rapidly converged on the hospital, their faces etched with shock and tear-stained terror, the wheels of justice simultaneously began to turn with ruthless efficiency. The police, having secured the gruesome crime scene on the deserted road, immediately recognized the nature of the incident. The shattered debris, the distinct tire marks indicating a sudden, violent acceleration rather than a frantic attempt to brake, painted a chilling, undeniable picture. This was no tragic accident. This was a deliberate, malicious, and targeted vehicular assault. A massive, citywide manhunt for the ruthless hit-and-run driver was launched with unprecedented urgency. Back at the sprawling, echoing halls of the Logan estate, Brooke was entirely trapped in a prison of her own making. The physical evidence of her horrific crime was parked silently in her garage. The dented bumper, the shattered headlight, the microscopic traces of Steffy's blood and clothing embedded in the grille. But the true torture was the psychological hellscape of her own mind. Brooke paced the floors of her bedroom like a caged, feral animal, her breathing shallow and erratic as she hyperventilated into her trembling hands. Every time she closed her eyes, the horrifying, sickening sound of the impact echoed in her ears, and the image of Steffy's broken body flying through the air branded itself onto the back of her eyelids. The torment of her conscience was absolute, a crushing, suffocating weight that threatened to completely fracture her sanity. She had become the very monster she had spent her entire life accusing Stephanie Forrester of being. She had attempted to murder her husband's child in a fit of uncontrollable, vindictive rage. The sheer, terrifying magnitude of her actions rendered her entirely paralyzed, unable to confess, yet utterly unable to live with the agonizing secret that was actively tearing her soul to shreds from the inside out. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, the glaring, inexplicable absence of Brooke Logan Forrester during the most critical, devastating hours of the family's tragedy did not go unnoticed. As Ridge sat slumped in a plastic waiting room chair, his clothes still heavily stained with his daughter's blood, his mind began to race through the labyrinthine complexities of the evening. His wife, who was normally the first to rush to his side in times of crisis, who normally smothered him with support and affection, was nowhere to be found. Her phone went straight to voicemail, her whereabouts during the exact window of the horrific accident completely unaccounted for. The seeds of suspicion, tiny and insidious, began to take root in the fertile soil of the Forrester family's collective grief. Thomas Forrester, pacing the waiting room with a dark, vengeful fury burning in his eyes, openly questioned where his stepmother was. Taylor Hayes, arriving to support the man she never truly stopped loving and the daughter she adored, exchanged a loaded, terrified glance with Ridge. They all knew the explosive, volatile state of affairs at the office. They all knew the profound, burning hatred Brooke harbored for Steffy following the suspension of the hope for the future line. Ridge, torn between his agonizing, desperate vigil at his daughter's bedside and the terrifying, confusing lack of support from his wife, felt a cold, sickening dread begin to pool in the pit of his stomach. He tried to rationalize her absence, tried to convince himself that she was simply asleep, unaware of the nightmare unfolding across the city. But as the hours bled into dawn, and the police detectives arrived at the hospital to begin questioning the family about potential enemies, the glaring, undeniable truth of Brooke's missing alibi hung in the air like a poison cloud. The detectives, trained to look for motive and opportunity, immediately zeroed in on the highly publicized, deeply bitter corporate war at Forrester Creations. The recent, explosive altercations between Steffy and the Logan women provided a compelling, terrifying motive for the targeted attack. As the investigators began to piece together the timeline, the net slowly, inexorably began to tighten around the Logan estate. The family's growing suspicion was no longer just a paranoid whisper. It was evolving into a tangible, horrifying reality that threatened to completely obliterate the very foundations of the Forrester and Logan dynasties. This unprecedented escalation of violence represents the absolute, tragic culmination of a decades-long feud that has finally crossed the threshold into unforgivable criminality. Brooke Logan Forrester's blinding maternal rage has not only jeopardized the life of a brilliant, powerful young woman, but it has irreversibly destroyed the fabric of her own family. The psychological thriller that is now unfolding will test every single character to their absolute breaking limits. How long can Brooke hide the physical damage to her vehicle? How long can she endure the crushing, agonizing weight of her own guilt before her mind completely shatters? And what happens when Ridge Forrester, a man who has forgiven his wife for countless betrayals and indiscretions, finally uncovers the monstrous, blood-soaked truth? The realization that the woman he loves, the woman he shares his life with, is the very same ruthless monster who left his precious daughter to die in a pool of blood on a deserted road will be a revelation of apocalyptic proportions. The battle lines are no longer drawn in boardrooms or fashion runways. They are drawn in blood, guilt, and the pursuit of ultimate, unforgiving justice. The hunt for the culprit is on, and the walls are closing in on Brooke Logan Forrester.